Just going to wait for a couple more minutes for other folks to show up, but just thanks for being here, and pardon us as we did that sort of last minute little organizational scramble to make sure that we kind of know what we're doing. But the joy of collaboration is that you know, you're not just juggling the balls yourself. You have partners to juggle the balls with, and so it's always fun to see how it ends up in the final. So really glad to have this group together. So we'll just hold on for a little bit. Yeah, we're just another minute or so, and then we'll start. I think we're just about at 10 now, but. I think I will go ahead and dive in. So welcome everybody on behalf of the Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. We are just really glad to have you here, either if you're watching us live or on a pre-recorded session that we'll have up on our website here shortly. Really glad to have you with us today. Well, this is a topic that we get a lot of questions about. You know, from providers and people who want to be providers, just asking, well, how do you get funding for to do this work? And so we pulled together some folks and some resources, and we're going to approach this from a number of different perspectives. So I want to just first say that this is part of a series, a webinar series that we are doing throughout the year. We shoot for one a month, and then every once in a while, of course, the longer the virus goes on, the more kind of online programs we'll have that we would otherwise be doing in person. So, so just keep tuned to our website to see our events calendar. It's waqrr.org, WAQRR.org, to find out kind of where we are in the series. We have some really interesting ones coming up that we're looking forward to. So today, though, I want to introduce you to our little panel. So first, Carmen Long is Executive Director of Truly Motivated Transitional Living in Yelm, and she is also on the waqrr Board of Directors, as is Sherry Candelario. So Sherry is the co-executive director of Kate's House Foundation. They operate in King County, 5 or 6 homes now. Sherry,
we have 6.
6 homes now. And I didn't mention that Carmen's organization operates 4 homes. And then I am Alan Mua. I am the director of New Earth Recovery. We operate 5 homes in Skagit County, and also serve as chair of waqrr. And so we are just pleased to be with you today. And between the 3 of us, we think we've got some good information to share. And it turns out, as we were planning, we thought, well, I don't know, are we going to be able to fill the time? But I think we'll do just fine. There's a lot to talk about in all these topics. So so we're gonna dive in, and so I'll tell you where we're going today. We're going to talk about the fundability of recovery residences, just as a general overview, to say, you know, that there's indeed, we have some things to say about why funding recovery residences is really a good idea, whether you are a government entity or a private donor or a foundation, or just a lot of really good reasons to support us. Then we're going to talk about grants and what that looks like. Some other kind of ideas that we've compiled on just fundraising, just some general wisdom for especially those in the nonprofit sector. Then we're going to talk about vouchers, which is a growing source of funding for residences. Contracts, Sherry is going to share some things about how contracts work. So looking forward to that. And then final topic for conversation before questions and answers, we're going to talk about licensing as a way to eventually be able to receive Medicaid reimbursement. So what does it take to sort of make the jump to be able to receive that source of government funding? So we're going to dive in here, and I'm going to turn off my camera so I can pay a little more attention to the content here, and but looking forward to hearing from my co-panelists as well. So I just want to give you some talking points, and these are some of many that we could use to talk about how is it that what we do for a living, what we sort of dedicated our lives to in recovery residences, is fundable. So, of course, we believe in it, but if you're in the position of having to raise external funding, in other words, what we're talking about mostly today is how do you fund an operation beyond just charging your residents program fees or rent, knowing that that if you're providing any kind of service beyond just housing, you are likely going to need to be able to provide something. So I just want to give you some of these, and I'll probably stray from the script a little bit, but I want to just start us off by making the point that we are extremely fundable. So these are just some numbers that we threw together really quickly, and there's a lot more data that can support all of this. But in Washington, taxpayers spend about $34.80 to incarcerate a person for a month. So if someone is in jail, or this is probably a prison number, it's a DOC number, that's what it costs to have them in there for a month. Inpatient treatment, on the other hand, can cost $20,000 or more. As you all know, there's a broad range of inpatient treatment options, and there's a broad range of costs for those. But we're in the tens of thousands of dollars kind of range to fund that. And so those are the two most common interventions that we have for people with substance use disorder. So when they start, they're either when they start in an institution, it's either a jail or prison or inpatient treatment, and society has kind of figured that that's how we're going to deal with this problem. And so we put people there at very high expense. They also happen to be the two most expensive ways to deal with this. I suppose hospitalizations would fit in there as well. So what we do then as a society is we tend to sort of put people in those settings over and over again if they're not able to stay in recovery. And so at the highest level of care in a recovery residence, however, we can house somebody and give them services, even staffed and everything, without clinical services. We can do that for about a third or less of what it would cost to incarcerate somebody. And everybody in all of these systems would agree that that what we do in recovery residences is much more successful than either of the other two interventions alone. So if you think about it and you read the research, it tells us that what a person decides to do after treatment or after incarceration is much more important in terms of their long-term recovery. It has a much better, much more significant impact than where they went to do their initial recovery and how long they stayed there. So we're a fan of treatment. Treatment has a place in the continuum of care, no doubt about it. But what happens after treatment is extremely important. Another way to look at that, if you're trying to challenge people in your community or your neighborhoods or the community at large, I just think about it this way: is that how we, the community at large, welcome somebody back from an institutional setting has everything to do with whether they're going to succeed or not. So instead of sort of putting somebody away or kind of giving into the belief system that says, well, if I can just get somebody to treatment, they're going to be fine. Well, we all know that what happens after treatment is so vitally important, and so it is economically much more sustainable than sending somebody to those places over and over again. And in terms of what happens in the life of that person, it's just much more significant. There's a lot of good research too that talks about outcomes for people who live in recovery residences. Just one of them I want to highlight is that we know that someone who is in long-term recovery is twice as likely to be engaged in their community as someone from the general population. So we're not just turning out folks from our residences who are doing better in their own recovery, but they're also contributing to society. And not just in terms of volunteering and other community engagement, they also, of course, are paying taxes instead of receiving them. So anyway, as you can tell, I can probably go on and on about why what we do is important, but those are just a few talking points that, that I think are just vital as we talk about why we do what we do and how it impacts individuals and society. So all of that together, plus there's much more to say, it is really compelling when we're talking to people who who are wondering, well, why would you do that? Why would you put somebody in housing? Why are you spending your time and energy creating these spaces for folks? Well, these are a few reasons why. So I'm going to turn it over to Carmen, who is going to talk to us a bit about grants. And Carmen, I'm glad to be your clicker if you want to just tell me when to advance. So.
Yep, that's great. Right there's great. So I thought it would be helpful to just talk about what is a grant. This was an actual definition that I found online that I thought would probably be better than what I would come up with on my own. So a grant is a bounty, gift, contribution, or subsidy, cash or cash in kind, bestowed by a government or other organization called the grantor for a specific purpose to an eligible recipient, which would be called the grantee. Grants are usually conditional upon certain qualifications as to the use, maintenance, and specific standards, or a proportional contribution by the grantee or another grantor. So some grants, the grantee might say, grantor might say, we'll give you X amount, but we need to see you getting funded by, another foundation. So sometimes it's kind of a collaborative type thing. So if you want to flip to the next slide, Ellen. These are the basic 3 types of grants that you would be looking for. I think probably the most popular one would be general support or operating support, unrestricted funding. The reason why most of us really like to look after these as far as nonprofits go is you can use them any way you want to. There's no earmark on them. There's no project that it's tied to. You could use it for keeping the lights on, or you could use it for building a shed. As far as the grantor is concerned, they're not really putting any restrictions on how you use it, which if you're looking for extra funding in a year's time, you could see where general operating support or unrestricted funding would be really advantageous for a nonprofit. Capital support is specific to capital campaigns that would involve building construction, acquisition of land. If you wanted to go, hey, we want to open up another house, capital support is usually larger contributions, mostly because building construction, buying land, remodeling and that type of thing are big projects. And usually when you're asking for capital support, most grantors really want to see a really good strategic plan as to why the money they're giving you is going to help you in the future. So it's a lot of kind of future and forecasting that goes along with writing a capital campaign grant. And lastly is program development grants or restricted funding. And these would be going after a particular project or program that you wanted to do within your nonprofit. So if you wanted to increase your program and go, hey, we really want to add a life skills program, but we know it's going to take specific materials or specific staff time or that type of thing. Again, there's a lot of specifics that a grantor is going to want to see as to why this program is so impactful to what you're doing and the people that you're serving. I know years ago we wrote a grant for a specific program called Eat for Life for Truly Motivated, and it was to help with our food costs. We wanted to be able to buy more nutritious foods and have somebody kind of come along and help educate our residents as to how important good nutrition is in the early phases of recovery. So project and development grants typically are more what grantors lean towards when they're looking at giving out money. But I will say that general operating support is getting funded more now than probably that it used to be. So when you're looking at, we'll go ahead to the next slide, Ellen. Grants are typically awarded to a nonprofit organization for a distinct program or purpose. These are just some examples. A grant maker generally focuses on its giving on to a specific geographical region and a specific area of interest that the grantor is interested in. So a lot of grantors are very interested in education, children, music, arts, that type of thing. If you're running a recovery house, that would not be a grantor that you would want to go and spend time writing a grant with, because what you do is not their area of focus. Certain types of nonprofits, such as animal shelters or environmental groups, particular types of support, such as program development, funding for equipment. So what's really important about, first of all, grants are a lot of work. Some are more work than others. And so you really want to make sure that you do your research or have somebody that can do the research for you to find grantors that are friendly to your specific focus of what you're doing. It is not advantageous to spend a lot of time writing a grant with a grantor that only focuses on a certain region or does not have an interest in what you're doing. So there's a lot of legwork and kind of investigating that needs to go on to find grantors that are really interested in what you're doing, and then you would make your case and decide what kind of grant you would be asking for. Different types of grantors, federal grants, obviously grants that are written at a federal level, state grants, that would be grants that would be given at a state level from your state government, not the federal government. Private grants, private foundations, those are probably more of what types of grants that we look at for Truly Motivated, and probably what most nonprofits are looking at is private foundations and trusts. I will say that there's a lot of businesses that also do grant work. I know Walmart gives out $1,000 local grants to communities. There's a lot of businesses that will do that as well. So again, it's about time and research, finding out how much time you want to invest. Federal and state grants probably take a little bit more time. With all grants, there's reporting involved. So after, say you get a $10,000 grant from a specific foundation, they're going to want you to report within a specific amount of time saying how you use the funds. And they want to hear that what they did was helpful to you. You don't just get the money and run. You really want to build a relationship with a grantor and hope to continue to have that partnership with them. Can I apply and be eligible as a for-profit? The answer is yes. If you want to flip to the next slide. I will say that being a nonprofit definitely puts you in a much better position to get grants. It's not to say that you can't get them as a for-profit, but it's just a lot different as a for-profit, but that's not to say that they're not available. The Small Business Administration, we've been hearing a lot about them lately. They do not supply grants for startups or small business expansion, but there are government grants for specific projects, including construction. There are many research grants, and there's a link there if anybody wants to go on afterwards and check that out, for small businesses supplied by the federal government in addition to the agency's loan and import expertise. So I think if you're a for-profit, the SBA would probably be a good place to start looking for grants and different startup and different things that the SBA offers. State governments, many state and city governments provide grants to small businesses for specific for-profit projects. I have only been working in the world of nonprofit grants, so I'm not able to expand on this in a really huge way, but they are available. Foundations, other business owners who have done exceptionally well are often interested in helping up and coming entrepreneurs by providing grants. An example of this that we would all be well aware of is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They funded grants awarded to small businesses to the national and global economy. So you wouldn't have to be a nonprofit necessarily to receive money from, for example, a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Okay, we'll go to the next one. All right. Resources for nonprofit grants. I just wanted to put a couple links on here. Professionalgrantwriter.org. That's actually a group that we've started working with. We hired them specifically to help us with grant writing and just to get us in a good position to write grants. The reason why I put their website on here is there is a wealth of information on their website. Even if you didn't hire them to work with you directly, there's so much information on there about grant preparation and how to do it and what to look for and how to spend your time. So I went ahead and put that on there. GuideStar, if you're a nonprofit and you are looking at wanting to write grants, it's really important to have a GuideStar profile. GuideStar is where most private foundations and trusts are going to go and take a look and see what your profile as a nonprofit looks like on GuideStar. And the more updated you keep your profile and the more information you have on it, the better it looks for you. There's different levels on GuideStar. Gold, bronze, silver. Obviously, the more information you put in, the more updated you keep it, the higher level you achieve. But I think the best would be to be at a bronze or a silver on there. And it's a lot of information about your 990 and your revenue and your expenses and board members and just a really well-rounded insight for grantors when they're looking at you. Grant Station, the Grantsmanship Center, Grants Plus Grants Opportunities, those are just links that kind of just give you a variety of resources as far as grant writing. What I want to say about grant writing is it seems really big, but if you can narrow it down to grantors that are in your area interested in what you're doing, then you've kind of honed in on where you want to start working at. There are directories, there are subscriptions that you can buy so that you've kind of got the inside scoop on different grantors for your area. Most of those cost money, but in my estimation, sometimes you got to spend money to make money. So grants can be pretty great. They can be anywhere from $1,500 to $100,000. It just really depends on how much work you want to put in into your grant writing. That's it for me.
Right. I want to just pile on to say, I really, what you said feels really important about kind of how do you get started. And so this can all feel really overwhelming if you haven't done it before, but I really like what you said about look for a local foundation, someone you've heard of in your area that helps local nonprofits or local businesses do things, and start there, and they will often kind of lead you to the next one. And
Right.
so
Right.
it's not an all or nothing proposition. You can dip your toe in the water.
Mm-hmm.
and do you find too that when you've written a couple that you're able to use some of that language over and over again as sort of your boilerplate for other?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's where kind of getting your toolbox ready is really important. You want to know stats about your nonprofit. You want to have really specific information about number of people served and what's your impact. And once you've got that down, it's not something that you have to keep replicating. You may change it up a little bit depending on who you're writing a grant to, but once you've got your toolbox and you've got all your really good basic information, then you're really well on your way to keep, working on grants. And I would say start small. Start with the local Walmart grant and see if you can get $1,000 and kind of get your feet wet, and then work your way up to bigger. The biggest thing with grants is that you're making an appeal to a grantor, and you're in competition with a lot of other people that are making an appeal as well. So telling your story, selling what you do, and showing why it's so impactful and why it's so vital, because they're investing their money in you and they want to make sure they're investing it well. So be confident in who you are and what you provide, and that it really is a worthwhile it's a worthwhile partnership for the grantor. And I think the things that Alan shared at the very beginning of this, of why we're fundable, those are really important conversations and narratives to have in a grant. Why are we more advantageous for you to fund than somebody else down the street doing something similar? So build your toolbox, start small, get a profile on GuideStar. That's important. It doesn't cost you any money, and get started.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carmen. That's good, really good stuff. we could probably do, I was just had 5 other thoughts come to my mind about grants, so we could probably do a whole program on grants at some point. Maybe we will, but it's a good place to go. I just wanted to talk about some other fundraising strategies for nonprofits that we've found really helpful. And these aren't proprietary. They're things that they're kind of conventional wisdom out there, but I just want to share them as for folks who are in this nonprofit world, especially if you're just getting started and you're wondering, how do we do this? And so the first thing is donor care. And all I want to say about that is you may have a list of donors already that contribute to your organization, especially if you've been around a while. And you may find that if you take care of the donors you have, and by take care of them, I mean be in relationship with them that's really good and healthy, thank them often and a lot and in personal and varied ways, that you don't need more donors, that you might be able to run your organization without having to always be hunting for more people who can contribute. That if you can maintain good relationships with the people who you already have, that they may increase over time as your expenses increase, as your vision increases for doing new interesting things. Next tool is a segmented donor list, and this is a very specific way. You would just take your list of folks who are donating to your organization, and you divide them up. And the kind of Cliff Notes version of using this tool is you treat your donors differently depending on how much they are invested in you. That doesn't mean that we don't value the person who gives $10, $20 a month. They're very valuable, and their heart is with you, and that's a really good thing. And so this isn't about discriminating against those folks. We want to be in touch with those folks with maybe like a monthly newsletter or some regular way of communicating broadly. But if you have say a group of 5 to 10 donors who are contributing a significant amount, maybe they make up something like 20% of your budget. Those folks probably need to be on the inner circle of your organization in a different kind of way. Obviously, if you're a nonprofit, you have to have a board of directors, so that's one way to keep them connected if they're good board members and have something to contribute to you that way. But otherwise, there are a lot of ways to stay in closer touch with them. So the long and short of this item is just pay attention to where your funds are coming from and be strategic about, you should know that. You should know what percentage of your donors give what percent. So how many people are in what you might call a top tier kind of category, and these are the folks that get this level of communication from us or this level of connection. And then there's another tier, probably three or four tiers of donors depending on how you want to look at it. The next one is a case statement, and I gave you a very brief version of a case statement at the beginning of our presentation today, which is just to say, you literally need to make the case to somebody who has a lot of ways they can give their money, whether this is a foundation or an individual or somebody else, to why should they give to your organization? Carmen talked about this a little bit too. We literally developed, with the help of our staff and our board members, we just got a lot of input and said, why is what we do important? And we crafted that, and a good case statement has some sections to it around what's the need that we're trying to meet. So really introducing people to the problem, right? And then how are we uniquely meeting that need? What's a story of somebody who's personally impacted by that? Some people really like statistics and other people really like stories. And so you got to do both. And then who else is helping in this endeavor? What are some strategic relationships that we have? And then very specifically at the end of the case statement is to say, here's what our donor profile looks like. And we're coming to you to see if you would like to be a top tier donor, or in our second tier of donors, we need this many people to do this. It's a very, what I would call assertive approach. It's not aggressive, but it's assertive. It's truth telling. It's honoring, it's respectful, but it also really invites people in a very specific way to be a part of what you're doing. Case statement isn't something you put up on your website. It's not that. It's something that you take to a one-on-one conversation with somebody who you're trying to invite deeper into a relationship with your organization. I could talk an hour about that, but we're going to keep moving. Development team. So if you're an organization that counts on donations for a large part of your budget, You want to have maybe a couple people on your board of directors, and maybe a couple people used to be, or maybe a couple like volunteers who are highly invested in your organization who get together on a regular basis and help you strategize about how to you're going to make your ends meet, and who you want to reach out to in order to solicit those donations. And those folks on the development team, that might be your board of directors, that might be their role, but often it needs to probably be a specialized group. And a development plan is simply that. And by development, we just mean how is the organization going to be sustained financially? And so what's the plan for that? What's our goal for this coming year? What do we need to do in order to grow in the way that our organization wants to grow, in order to serve more people, or in order to serve the people we serve better, or in order to improve a facility, or whatever that is? There should be some sort of plan. So when a donor approaches you and say, well, what are you trying to do? You have a concrete answer to say, well, here's what we're trying to do, and here's our plan to get there, and here's how you can fit into that plan. So so there's just some nonprofit fundraising nuggets. Again, a lot can be said about each of those, but hopefully that gets your wheels turning a little bit if you're in that role. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our colleague Sherry, who's going to talk about contracts and vouchers. I think we're going to do vouchers first.
Okay, sounds good.
Oops, I'm sorry. We're at contracts. My apologies.
Okay,
I guess we'll do that
contracts.
next.
Thank you, Alan. So by profession, I'm a patent counsel, which means for the last 20 years, I have set up many patent and legal departments. And instrumental to that are contracts. And what I want to do is demystify this for you. Because when people think of contracts, a lot of times they go, oh my gosh, I have to hire a lawyer to look at this. I can't do this myself. I'm fearful. These are very simple. And the reason we want to talk about these is you will likely engage in contracts with people who are giving you money. And so let's go ahead and simplify this so we take the fear factor out. And so a contract is simple. It's just an agreement between two parties. And you may hear the word bilateral, and what that is you're exchanging a promise for a promise. And the promise is you're going to provide quality housing, and some agency or the state of Washington or the federal government is going to give you money. And most contracts are bilateral. We own 6 houses in King County, KatesHouseFoundation.org, and we have a simple contract with the state of Washington for voucher payments, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but we have a much more complicated contract with King County. And so I want you to feel comfortable with the idea that you can do this. An agreement may be one-sided, and those are unilateral contracts. And kind of think about that. You buy a refrigerator and they give you a warranty that you may sign up for. So you likely will not do very many unilateral contracts. Let's kind of think of the word bilateral, like 2 arms. And both types of contracts are valid, and they may be referred to by different names, but this is basically the crux of what you're going to be dealing with. Next slide, please, Alan. So there's only 4 requirements to a contract. And just, if you want to take a picture of this slide, please do, because this is all you need to look for. And it's an agreement. What are you agreeing to do? So in the case of housing, you may be agreeing that I will provide housing and toiletries or electric, cable TV, whatever you decide to do. But whatever you choose to agree to do, that's your agreement. Consideration, that's a different word for money. What is the payment? And that's really important, because when you sign a contract, you want to make sure that the consideration is what you agree to do. And sometimes these contracts will be, we're going to pay you $500 a month, or they may have a large sum. We're going to pay you $10,000 a year. So it's really important to you to kind of tease that consideration out and ask yourself, can I afford to give this housing and the different amenities that I'm planning on doing for this payment? Now let's talk about contractual capacity. That's a term you can find on Google. And really what that is that's your legal ability to enter a contract. And you may be asking yourself, why is this important? Well, it's important if you're a housing provider and you enter a contract, but you aren't authorized to do that. Another way we look at legal ability, and this may concern some of your clients, does somebody have the mental capacity to enter a contract? Somebody could come back if you did a lease with somebody and state, well, I really didn't have the legal ability to enter this contract. And why is this important? And that's number 4, legality. Courts aren't going to enforce an illegal agreement. So if you enter a contract, just make sure you know that the person who's signing the contract has the legal ability or the authority to enter that contract. So next slide, please. So I want you to, I've simplified this because these are the things that you'll look for, and feel free to take a photo of this slide. Let's think of it in terms of business, because recovery homes really are a business. Frank and I have purchased our homes in King County, and we use contracts with King County or with the state of Washington or with nonprofits to pay for the room fees for our clients. So one of the things we always look at is, what is the term? Some entities the term is 90 days for the vouchers. Some entities the contract is 2 years. So term you will find in the body of the contract, and it tells you how long is the contract. And does it renew automatically? It's not usually a good idea if it's somebody you don't know. You don't want to be stuck with a contract that you want to get out of. So you always have a right to terminate if you put that into the term clause, and that comes up to termination. Do you want to have the right to get out of this contract at any time? And what happens when the contract terminates? Some contracts may say, okay, you can give us 60-day notice. That's pretty typical, or 90 days notice, but you still have to house people for a certain amount of time. So if you sign a contract with anyone, these are plain English business terms, look for term and termination. And also price and payment. Does that agreement reflect the price and payment terms you agreed to? What we find, and we'll be talking about Department of Corrections vouchers next, DOC tends to pay before people come to your house, but a lot of vendors pay at the end of the month. So you kind of think about that. Do you have that slush fund in your bank account when you're first starting out to cover expenses if you have to wait 30 days for payment? Let's talk about confidentiality, because in these days of HIPAA, this is critically important. Are you bound to confidentiality, and what does that mean? Frequently, that means confidential to the terms of the contract. And what that means is you can't tell your friends that, this nonprofit is paying me this amount of money. But another way to look at confidentiality, and I want to think about it in broader terms, because by training, I'm also a medical scientist, so I work in biotechnology. So we talk about HIPAA all the time. And people in recovery are considered people with a disability. You are bound by HIPAA, as are they. So what you really want to do in your program agreement or your agreement in the contract is state that any clients you take in, you have the right to be able to share back with the people who are paying you, because they want to hear back. So for example, if you have a nonprofit who has case management over an individual, and that individual doesn't come home at night, or that individual may have a relapse, you want to have permission from the people paying you that you can discuss that. So confidentiality is very important. This is how we handle it at Kate's House. When people fill out our application and rules, they have an electronic signature that we can have discussions with the people who are paying for them, because we want, we're in this to help people in recovery and help them do well. And doing well means helping support people in a social model of recovery. And that social model means that we embrace our arms around them to help them with any hiccups along the way. Let's have the next slide, please, Alan. So timeline, milestones, delivery terms, and I'm hoping all of these business terms will help you with anything outside of a recovery home. And that's the date you want the work completed or the product completed. Your product, your work completed, it's, what are you expected to do? Some people that we have contracts with want weekly reports. That's our deliverable. And that brings us up to next. What do you need to provide? And some examples are reports or meetings. We have one contract where we have a once a month, hour and a half discussion with the housing managers, just to kind of go over how well everybody's doing and anybody who may need more support. And I want to tell you, the type of more support we're talking about isn't always, you think of terms of a relapse. On our call this week, we discussed the fact that we had one gentleman who would go sleep on the couch and disrupt the house. I mean, you know, sometimes the hiccups in shared housing are nothing serious. It's just what is pro-social behavior. Warranty, you've heard of the word warranty. That means how long is it going to last? Is there a guarantee of results? You know, we can't guarantee results, but we can guarantee that we can report, we can share information, we can email if we have an issue. And kind of think about this limitation on liability, that will be in your contracts too, because it brings up the next thing. Do you have insurance? What insurance is required? You know, we have a blanket liability insurance policy that covers recovery residences and nonprofits. That's our limitation on liability. You know, something to keep in mind, Walker, if you go to the Walker website, has links to all of us where if you need, you know, any information, you've got a team that can kind of guide you along. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is my favorite slide because this is how we built Kate's House Foundation, who pays for the house. So, you know, we started out, my daughter Kate went through addiction and when she was a late teen. And that's how I found out recovery housing wasn't always what we envisioned or what my colleagues, so many of my colleagues envision, which are great homes and great neighborhoods. And so we took an old daycare center and we rehabbed it and we made it the most amazing home for teens coming out of hospitals, except we didn't have any clients. Nobody knew who we were. However, the Department of Corrections heard about us and they showed up one day and they looked at our beautiful house with 6 bedrooms and many of them were shared bedrooms. And they said, we have a program you may be interested in. You know, since you're not getting any traction with the local hospital because you're new, we'd be willing to work with you. And we said, what does that mean? We haven't worked with DOC before and we don't know anything about it. And they said, we will pay you a voucher for, it's kind of called an early release program. And at that point, it was $500 a person. And they said, you can put 2 people in a room. And so we were looking at our newly rehabbed house that we had spent 6 months building. And we said, you know, that could really help us with some house payments here and fulfill our mission of helping people in recovery. And what we found out is the people who are in early release, who are in recovery, have probation officers who help do urinalysis, who help provide support for programs, for hospitalization when needed. And it was a great partnership. From that partnership, we grew from 1 to 3 houses in 6 months. And we dearly love working with DOC Housing. And I'm going to give you a link on the next slide. Another group that we've worked with is the Erd Program. Again, they're amazing people. You know, the people who house people care about their clients just the way we care about our clients. HEN is Housing and Essential Needs. It's federal money that's funneled through Catholic Community Services. And they have a worksheet that kind of tells you what you need to have in the house. They inspect the house and they will pay your expected room charge. Another one is city and county funds. The United Way will funnel money to many local city governments and county governments for housing needs for people in need, and we tap onto these freely. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a hyperlink. I misspoke, it's the earned release date. I've always called it the early release date, but it's the earned release date. And these are usually people who are low risk. Our first 2 years, we only housed women releasing from prison, and all of them had a drug offense and what I would call, you know, just a very low level offense, felony. You know, it was, you know, a bad check or theft or something, but all of their offenses were related to using meth and heroin. And so we started working with these beautiful, wonderful women in 2016. And now several hundred people later, we've actually moved up the food chain and we take people on house arrest. But I can't vouch enough for the opportunity to work with Washington State on their ERD housing program, because they provide funding, but they also provide support. I know in the early years when we were first starting out, connect us up with other housing operators, give us guidance. We met many, many people in the field. This is a wonderful way. If you're thinking about working in recovery homes, these are great people to work with. I'm going to turn the State Opioid Response Funder to Justin Cram. Now I want to introduce you to Justin. Justin is our administrator for Walker. He's been wonderful, incredible human being. And he actually worked on this funding and it has a wealth of expertise. So Justin, I want you to take it away.
Thank you. So I personally dealt with the state opioid response funding through Skagit County at Catholic Community Services. And I was working on the recovery support section of this funding. It's a 3-part program in which they have one aspect which is the funds are to go towards prevention. There's one aspect where it goes towards treatment. And then the one I specifically worked with was recovery services. And to my knowledge, the recovery services are available in a few different counties, and I will be able to, let's see, I wrote it down. Sorry about this. The recovery support services were available in Snohomish County at the Recovery Cafe. It was available in King County with the Recovery Cafe, Tacoma. I want to say Pierce County, but that sounds wrong.
That's correct. That's right.
Okay. With the Recovery Cafe, it was with Okanagan BHC, Spokane Recovery Cafe, Pierce Seattle had these funds, Comprehensive Healthcare, which I'm not exactly sure who that's from, and then Clark County itself had these funds. And what these funds were available for wasn't specifically for recovery housing costs, but it was to reduce some of the barriers that individuals faced in early recovery as opioid users. The only requirement for someone to get this funding would be if they were in recovery for opiate addiction. I worked with individuals who had anywhere between, I think my lowest amount of sober time was about a month and a half, upwards to individuals who had coming up on 3 years of sobriety. And what we were able to do was use these funds for Oxford housing or for any NAR or WAQRR accredited housing, and we were able to pay the cost for an individual for upwards to 6 months with this program. There is also a similar program which used to be referred to as Access to Recovery at Catholic Community Services. We called it the Recovery and Community Funds, and that one wasn't specific to opioid users. But knowing about these programs that are available in the different counties, and when you can utilize these resources to help pay for some of the recovery costs, is very beneficial. We were able to, I want to say, house or pay for the housing of, I want to say, close to 15 or 20 individuals for a 6 months period, which was a good portion of my caseload. So finding out what grants are available within your county can be very beneficial. Always looking to the recovery support providers and finding out what they have available within your county is beneficial. And I saw in the chat, Comprehensive is available in Walla Walla. Thank you to Karen for letting us all know that.
There is one more question in the chat. Thank you, Justin. I wanted to throw out one more question that's in the chat to Sherry, asking how do you get connected to the ERD program? Is there a contact I can connect with, or how does someone find out about it?
Okay, it's a great question. So I've got the hyperlink here. And what you want is the housing specialist or transitional housing provider. And depending on what county you are in, there's 2 in King County. So I would go through the docwa.gov information right here and look for your housing specialist. And I drop them an email and tell them you're interested in becoming a housing provider. They will send you a packet and you can fill out the packet. They'll inspect your home.
Mhm.
The next thing that happens, we have found that being an unincorporated King County, although it is very, very easy to be approved. With COVID, it's a little bit harder to get an inspection. I think they're just doing these online, but it usually takes a month to be approved to be a vendor. And that's what you're called. You're defined as a housing vendor. But we just spoke to Steve Dalton last Friday, who's the King County housing provider, the transitional housing specialist. And he said they're really looking for more vendors. So I would definitely, look online. If you have any issues, just email through Walker and we'll find you a direct link.
Yeah, and that's true across the state too, not just in King County. That DOC is always on the watch for good providers, and I think of the folks who have really taken advantage of that voucher system across the state has really made the DOC really wary, and so they have processes in place that will sort of separate out the really worthwhile providers who are doing good work from those who are just interested in the voucher, and that's a big deal for them, right? And that's what they're trying to do.
They have really weeded out, and the average vouchers are $500 a person, and we charge more than that at Kate's house. But in the March, we were called by the prison system, and they offered us $700 a person to take people on house arrest for up to 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of a flexible program. The reason we have that offer is because they know us very well. They know our homes, and we've been doing this now for 5 years. But, it's baby steps. We started off with 3 women. I called them the Golden Girls. They were all women in their early 50s who had unfortunately spent brief amounts of time in prison. And I really would encourage you to get to this web link and learn more about this program, because it's really a way to dip your toe into the recovery home business with people who are truly, truly motivated to do well.
Yeah. Thank you, Sherry. All right, I want to. Oh, okay. Here we go. There's a little bit more on this topic, so I'll let you take it away.
Okay, so I'm a little bit ahead of time here. So the ERD is typically $500 for 3 months, but I want to share with you the Second Chance Act. So when we first got going, the Second Chance Act is federal, and there's billions of dollars funneled into Second Chance. I want to introduce you to that language, because that language really is synonymous with reentry. Reentry means helping people come from prison into the community. And Second Chance Act, there's frequently money funneled into Washington State, and I know that can increase the state's 3-month voucher up to 6 months. The other thing that we've done a lot of work with the last 2 years is a program also administered by Department of Corrections called Graduated Reentry. And they're bringing people out of prison 6 months to a year early on house arrest, which means that they're not going anywhere. And they'll pay for the entire time those folks are with you. The pandemic payments, that's what I just referred to, that came into being from March through May. And basically we had a call asking us, how many beds would you be willing to sign over to us for people? Now, we always interview people on the phone who move into the house, and that includes people while they're incarcerated, because we want to make sure people want to move into a suburban neighborhood and, live. One of our homes is next to a daycare center. So we want to make sure it's a good fit and they want to live in community. So that's something to kind of keep in mind if you have a little bit of trepidation about doing this. Now, hen housing will pay your bed fee. And so whatever that happens to be, in King County, we're a little bit higher. We're $650 a bed to $700 a bed. And actually we go even higher for some of our contracts, but they will pay whatever you charge, but they will inspect your house. And so kind of keep that in mind. We've had good luck with hen housing. You know, just a little story. The first woman we had who came to us from Hen Housing was a mother living in her car, and she was living in her car so she could pay child support. So a lot of the folks who are going through Hen and Catholic Community Services are just amazing people who are just needing a hand up. I think, Alan, it's all you.
Alan, I believe you're muted.
Here we go. How's that? Sorry about that. So if you have more questions for Sherry, she's going to stick around, and so at the end we'll be able to answer those. I want to talk about House Bill 1528, which is passed in 2019 and did several things. Some of them related directly to funding, and one of them is a loan fund that has been set up. It's in there in the final stages of working on it. But there are a couple of little hiccups that they're working on. But they essentially modeled it after a loan fund that's been in existence for Oxford House for many years. But the total fund that was approved as this legislation is $500,000. It's a revolving loan, which means that as people repay the loan, it goes back into the pot for future people to be able to borrow it. So they're obviously very interested in people repaying the loan. So it's not like a wink, wink, nod, nod, you know, it's a loan, but it's really a grant. No, the future of the program really depends on people repaying it. So we're going to have to hire some thug-like people, I think, to enforce this thing. But anyway, the goal, of course, is to give some capital to folks who are just starting out, who just need a little bit of an advance in order to make something happen. So it could be, some cases, first and last month rent. It could be, hey, we need to hire a program coordinator or somebody like that to kind of oversee things. And so this sort of gets you going before you're able to start collecting fees from residents. So loans are $4,000 each. They're repaid over 2 years. And so I don't have that payment right in front of me, but it's pretty reasonable. It's, you know, it's $200 a month or something like that. It's really, it's quite reasonable. So it's something that's doable for folks. The loans aren't huge, but again, if it's something that can help someone get started, then that's great. They are working on sort of finalizing the application process, but essentially the goal is to make that really streamlined so people can get the funds pretty shortly after they apply. They hope to have them available by the end of the month, and we will communicate that broadly as soon as they are available via our listserv. So if you're not on the Walker listserv already, and by listserv, it's just our email list. If you want to get on our email list, go to our website, and at the bottom of the website there's a place to just sign yourself up so that you're on that list. But that's when we'll be announcing when those applications are out there from the healthcare authority in the state. So we've contracted with the state to be a part of that process, and we're still determining what our role is going to be. But essentially, we'll be somehow involved with kind of helping to vet those apps. Those licensed by the Department of Health as recovery houses will also have access to the funds. So Carmen's going to talk a little bit about recovery house and what that means very specifically as a licensed facility. But you know, so this fund could help somebody get that licensing if they wanted to. It can be used for operating startup costs. Here are some examples: rent, of course, security deposits, salaries of on-site staff. So the idea is $4,000 to get you started, and we will let you know. It will be run through the healthcare authority, and so that's the folks who will be making the most, making these sort of regulations and enforcing them over time. So we will be in touch as soon as there's information about that. There is one other loan that is also was created by the House Bill 1528, and it's a capital loan. So when Carmen was talking about grants, she mentioned that you know, you have operating loans and operating grants and capital grants. This is sort of mirrors that, in that capital grant would be for something bigger, like a facility remodel or project that needs to be done in order to get your accreditation wrapped up. So maybe there's a staircase that needs to be reinforced or something like that that sort of is in the way of you being able to open your facility or open it safely, or it might maybe there's a cosmetic thing that really has to be done in order for the house to look good in the neighborhood or whatever. So that is not quite as far along as the operating fund because they don't have anything to model it after. So they're building it from the ground up. And as you know, the wheels of government move a little slower than a smaller organization. So they're in process on that, and we'll have, as soon as we get that information on the capital loan, it'll likely be into next year a little ways, but we will communicate that as well. I just wanted to mention this property tax exemption. So again, we're talking about how do you get funded. If you are a nonprofit that either owns or rents your facility, you can apply through the Department of Revenue for a property tax exemption. You would still be required to pay local taxes, but not the larger kind of state portion of that tax. So it applies to nonprofits. As I said, they can follow the program rather than the owner. In other words, if you are somebody who runs a program or runs, in this case, sober housing in somebody else's house, you can, as long as you're responsible for paying the property tax. So most of you would have to probably rewrite your lease with your landlord and just have that lease amount decreased by the amount of the property tax so that you can take that over. So it's a wash to your landlord, however you want to structure that. But basically, then your landlord qualifies for the property tax exemption once it's approved. That is really valuable, so that if you end up purchasing the property over time, that exemption goes with the program. In other words, the property tax, if it was granted, the exemption granted under, as long as you're using the property in the same way, that will transfer over even when the owner changes. So I say here at the top that it's for folks, if your program requires 2-year stay or less, that's how it fits into the category for tax exemption, and it's considered at that point a transitional residence. So it's transitional housing. That's the category that we fit into. So if you have a program like Oxford houses, for instance, don't have a length of stay limitation. So if you're an owner of an Oxford house, unfortunately, you wouldn't qualify for this, especially if you're not a nonprofit as well. So those are the two kind of criteria: length of stay and nonprofit status. So dor.wa.gov is where you would go, and there's a property tax section there, and you dig into that a little bit, and then you start to look at the exemptions. So that's how you would find out more about that. And again, we're glad to give you some technical assistance on for those of us who have been through that. We're glad to talk to you about how that works. But they're really great to work with the Department of Revenue. They're obviously trying to weed out, make sure that nobody is getting this who's not supposed to. But if you fit in the category, it is one way that you can save some from your expense lines. Instead of just focusing on revenue here, we're trying to round out the whole picture. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Carmen, who is going to talk about licensing and certification. Again, this is another way if you wanted to look at another source of public funding, you could get Medicaid reimbursement. There's a little bit to it, so Carmen's going to talk about that.
There's a little bit to it. Yes, indeed. So this is licensor and certification requirements for Medicaid reimbursement. I am still learning about this alongside Alan and other members of Walker. We're getting our education basically right now from the Healthcare Authority of Washington State. But basically, if you want to flip to the next slide, there's two separate licensing requirements. One is for you to be a behavioral health agency. That's one separate licensing. And then the other is for your actual facility. So it's two separate licensing. They can happen concurrently at the same time together, the entire process, but it is two separate licensors. This is just kind of a checklist here. I tried to keep it pared down. There's a lot more information that goes along with this, but this is to become licensed as a behavioral health agency. And that is the WAC there. I believe that, is that a hyperlink? You could look this up, or we could give it to you later, but the WAC is the operating guidelines that the state works within. So you must have a governing body, you must have an administrator, you must have a policies and procedures manual, you need to have an individual service plan, you need to have a record system, and obviously that record system would be holding confidential information, so I'm sure there would need to be some what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody help me out here. A way to keep that private and stored securely.
Yeah, confidentiality, privacy policy, and
all those good things.
Facilities to do that, all of that. Yeah.
And all of the folks that would be coming to your agency getting your services would definitely be protected under HIPAA. It would be no different than if they were going to a doctor. So the record system would be pretty important. You would need to have HR, human resources, a way to do background checks and training and that type of thing. So I would think that you would need to have some kind of HR person or HR department. It cannot be a personal residence. That doesn't mean that it couldn't be a house. It just means that you personally cannot reside there and live there. You need to be able to provide assessment and counseling services that are provided by a substance use disorder professional. Formerly would be have been called a CDP, but the new name is SUDP or an SUDPT trainee. So someone that is in the process training to become an SUDP. So it couldn't be just you having really great addiction services that you're providing that you think are fantastic. It actually needs to be services delivered by somebody who is certified as a substance use professional, disorder professional, or somebody who's in the training capacity. Behavioral health agency residential SUD treatment services requirements. Again, there's the WAC for that. Provide substance use disorder treatment for an individual in a facility with 24-hour-a-day supervision. I'm assuming that most of you, as you're listening right now, are starting to gather this is more than operating a day-to-day sober living type of environment. What this would be falling under is what the state would be referring to as a level 3 recovery house. And that is far different than what myself or other folks that might be on here right now are doing. It's not to say that you couldn't do it or that you couldn't go through this process, but I'm sure that you're probably gathering by now that this is very specific services and very specific criteria to be considered a recovery house that would be able to receive Medicaid reimbursements as a level 3 recovery house. And so the 24-hour-a-day supervision means that you would have obviously paid staff that are there keeping an eye on your clients 24/7. You would need to use ASAM criteria for admission, continued services, discharge planning, and decisions. For those of you who aren't familiar with what ASAM is, it's the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And they are who sets the criteria and standards for addiction treatment. And that is what our state and most states would look to as far as what treatment model that you're providing. It would need to meet ASAM criteria. You need to maintain a list of resources, including self-help groups, referral options that can be used by staff to refer an individual to appropriate services. That would be services outside of what you're offering. So it might be other outpatient treatment providers, anything that somebody coming into your facility would need to have an awareness of while they're there and once they're transitioning. You would need to provide an individual service plan that must be initiated with at least one goal identified by the individual during the initial assessment or at the first service session following the assessment. So the service plan would be something that you would collaborate obviously with the goal that is set by the client that you're serving, but you need to be able to deliver service plans. We can do the next slide. Residential SUD treatment services provide education on the following. So this is all pretty standard. Obviously, you're providing education on substance use disorders. Relapse prevention would need to be a part of your service plan of what you deliver. Bloodborne pathogens, would need to be a part of the educational process, tuberculosis, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, nicotine use disorder, and impact of substance use during pregnancy, risk to the fetus, importance of informing medical practitioners of chemical use during pregnancy. These are all things that you would need to provide as part of your ongoing education process if you were to get Medicaid reimbursements. Next slide, please. Behavioral Health Agency Recovery House Services certification requirements. So a lot of this starts to feel a little bit redundant, but we provide SUD residential treatment services that provide a program of care and treatment with social, vocational, recreational activities to aid an individual adjustment to abstinence, relapse prevention, recovery skills development, to aid in job training, employment, and participating in other types of community services. So those, again, would all be services that you would need to have on your menu. You would provide no less than 5 hours per week of treatment services in line with ASAM level 3.1. Okay, so that was licensing as a behavioral health agency. This is licensing as a facility. Again, you would need to have some of the same things as you would as an agency for the RTF, which is residential treatment facility. You would need to have a governing body. You would need to have an administrator. You would need to have policies and procedures in place, an individual service plan, again, a record system, and HR. You would need to have a quality improvement program, an infection control program. You would need to have staff present 24/7, which one trained in first aid and CPR. You would need to have food and nutrition services. And then there would be construction standards. So this would be more of like your actual facility, your kitchen, your sleeping rooms, your laundry room, common rooms, water, sewage, lighting, heating, ventilation. The other part that is not on here that would definitely be a big part of it would be that the fire marshal would need to come in and make sure there's fire suppression systems and different types of things. So you can see that this is a pretty big step up from operating a recovery home like a lot of us do. But this is the criteria for getting Medicaid reimbursements here in Washington State. Just a little bit about the licensing certification process overview. Like I said before, both the Behavioral Health Agency and RTF licensing applications are separate, but they can be submitted simultaneously. Both applications require the submission of policies and procedures describing how the facility will meet WAC requirements. And again, if you want those WAC requirements, I believe this will be available on our Walker website afterwards, and you could definitely look those up if you really want to have some fun reading. Both applications require submission and appropriate fees, and that's where Alan was talking about the revolving funds that our state is now offering. You could use those revolving loan funds to help with your applications and fees that are involved with the licensing. Both applications require background checks for key individuals. The timeline to receive a license varies based on the length of construction and the quality of your policies and procedures that you submit. Processing the paperwork can be done very quickly. And that's it on that end. I know that's a lot. Again, like I said, we're learning about this as well. Alan, do you know of anybody that's been a recovery home provider that would be kind of in our genre that has made that next step?
Not yet, but I know some folks who are looking at it. So the route that they've taken is they've sort of gone with the recovery, the agency direction first. So they created a separate agency outside of their housing. They operate their housing at a high level, non-clinical setting or non-clinical level. So they offer support services and so on, but there's nobody that's clinically licensed who's working in the house.
Okay.
But now they're saying, well, maybe then the next step is that we would kind of up our game at the house, but they've already done everything. So they have a mechanism in place to do the Medicaid reimbursement in their agency, which is a separate from the house, but that infrastructure is all in place. So for them, the leap to be able to then just convert the house over and have their SUDPs working in the house and all of that isn't nearly as intense as it would be for those of us who don't have any of that other infrastructure in place. So I think there definitely be kind of a gradual journey into this into the licensing that people would need to take. So we'll see. We're in touch with them. We're hoping to see how that goes and whether they decide to do that or not. They may decide that they can refer folks back and forth from one entity to the other, and that meets the need. But they may also take that step. So we'll see.
The other part that's not on those lists that's just kind of a practical thing to know is that you would need to you would have to have somebody on your staff that is savvy in doing the Medicaid reimbursement process. So that's not on those slides, but that's just kind of something to think about. You would need to have somebody that knows how to do that process or is able to at least learn how.
Yeah. So for a small operator who just has a house or two, and that's kind of what they're doing, and they're minimally staffed and they're doing most of it basically by charging residents fees and kind of running their operation that way, even with contracts and so on. Without an external funding source, this sounds like this could be a pretty big leap. But for somebody who's maybe got multiple facilities, has some infrastructure in place, has some staffing, especially on the financial HR end, this might be a next logical step for them. So, well, so Carmen, thank you, and thank you, Sherry. I want to just open it up, and I'll ask if anyone wants to submit questions or comments via the chat. I'll ask Justin to be our reader if we have any of those that we can field, any of us, about anything we've talked about today. So we'll open up the chat and let Justin read those out as if they come in. So far not seen any, but that's okay. We're gonna wait. Sherry or Carmen, anything else as we're waiting for those? Anything else you want to say that sort of anything that the others talked about that jogged your memory that you wanted to just get a couple more licks in before we
yeah, well, we were talking about different sources of funding. What came to mind was the HARPS program. Yes, I don't know if it's something that you guys have worked with up there.
Talk about that a little bit. What do you know? Yeah,
so it's housing and recovery through peer services. So basically, to put it in a nutshell, it's to combat homelessness. It is specific to folks who are experiencing homelessness or in danger of experiencing homelessness, or if they're exiting from some kind of psychiatric hospital or treatment stay. And so the goal is they're bridge funds. They're to help folks transition from an institution to supported living. They do more than just housing, but that's really the main focus is the housing piece. Yeah. It's in different counties. It just came to our county, Thurston Mason, about 3 years ago. But I do know it's also in King, it's in Pierce. It's held, the contract would be, so there's state and federal funds, but the contract is held by different behavioral health organizations. So for Thurston County, our outpatient treatment provider and MAT provider and mental health provider, they happen to hold the contract. No, excuse me, they don't hold the contract for that. This is completely separate. I was thinking about the treatment sale tax funds. So different BHOs would hold the contract for that by county. But they remind me a little bit of the SOAR funds that you guys were describing. And so again, the initiative is to end homelessness. There's a priority, definitely from my experience, a priority given to folks who are exiting an inpatient treatment stay or a hospital stay. And they are very efficient in what they do. It's typically $1,500 per person. However, that's expended depending on what your rate is for your beds. But they also help with a number of other things. Any barriers that somebody would be experiencing having been homeless or potentially going to be homeless is what they help with. So
that's HARPS.
That's HARPS.
Justin, looks like we might have had a comment or question in the chat.
From JC, it says, how do you find information on the recovery community funds and recovery support services? And I'm wondering if this has to do with what I talked about with the SOR program. And I am going to, I think everyone should be able to see the link that I'm about to send in the Q&A section. And this will redirect you to the HCA's website and specifically the SOR section. And there is going to be a link that is under the contact where it also has an email that you can go to, which is the recovery, which is a SOR treatment at hca.wa.gov. So I will also add that into the Q&A.
Perfect. And then again, for those of you who are watching this recorded, obviously those slides will give you some of that, and then you can just, we try to read the links out loud so you can copy them down if you're listening to. So any other questions or feedback, or Sherry, anything you want to pile on into the conversation that as we're listening?
I loved your part on grant writing, Carmen. It was amazing, you know, because that's something we haven't done much of, but we have used a service called Upwork, where all kinds of professionals, from people who do web development to writing to grant writing, are available, that you can hire for minimal charge. And if you hear a howl in the background, that's my poodle. She's decided.
She's really sad.
I apologize. I don't think she likes it.
Let's see. And then we also have a comment from Cameron saying, will you provide a comprehensive list of contact information for all the sources of funding referenced today? I will try and go through and rewatch this so that I can provide those. We could send it out in an email or make it available on the Walker website. So that will be published later today.
Yeah, that's a great resource. Thanks, Cameron. That's a great suggestion, because I think it would be good in our little resource section to just say funding sources that we know of. And obviously those vary a lot in terms of who initiates them. A lot of these, I'm thinking specifically around HARPs and SOAR funding, get initiated through the resident. The resident would go and seek those out as support for themselves, but then obviously then their housing provider benefits, and the resident of course benefits usually by being able to have some of those expenses covered. So so it just depends on the source as to who goes and finds the funding. But
and we always ask up front whenever we're contacted by anyone, you know, because we take a lot of non-DOC people, we say, how will this be funded? Yeah. And we also have a lot of people who earn significant money. You know, at one point we had a whole house full of women working on downtown high-rises making more than their probation officers. They were making $30 an hour. Wow. So they were self-paying. So, yeah, you know, I think that's really important as a housing provider to ask up front, you know, and I didn't know that when I first started until somebody from Department of Corrections told me that a lot of people releasing from prison have significant bank accounts and they're able to self-fund. Yeah, it's not all, this isn't one size fits all. Our residents vary quite a bit in terms of what they bring to the table. So. Anything else on the chat or Q&A, Justin? Not that I am seeing. All right. Well, I want to thank again our panelists and Justin. Thank you, Carmen, Sherry, Justin, for being a part of this. Thank you for those of you who hung with us for this, for the live session. And as we post this online, hopefully other people will be able to benefit. It strikes me as we talked about all of these areas that this could have been a lot longer. But we are more than willing to spend some time on the phone or Zoom with individuals to just talk through what we're learning about all of this. It's obviously these are evolving landscapes. And so one real benefit of being a part of our network is that you have access to people who have been there before. And that's true in all kinds of categories, but in the funding one in particular, we're all learning as we go, and we can certainly help each other. So with that, I will close us out for the day, and thank you all for attending and participating, and look forward to the next one of these next month. Keep an eye on the website for what's coming up, and we'll sign off. Take care all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.